Scene 1. The thread beside the moon. Near midnight, when the fields had become one dark, breathing shape beneath the sky, a farmer looking upward might have noticed a pale thread where no thread should be. It stretched beside the moon, finer than mist and steadier than rain. For a few heartbeats it seemed to join an earthly mulberry tree to a bright blue-white star. Then a cloud crossed the moon, the thread disappeared, and the leaves below went on whispering as though they had seen nothing unusual. The old people of the valley knew better. They said that cloth was being woven above the roof of night. Its colors were too subtle for daytime eyes, the gray before rain, the silver at a river's bend, the faint rose that lingers after sunset has gone. Each strand passed through the hands of a celestial weaver. When her shuttle moved smoothly, clouds traveled in gentle layers and the seasons kept their appointed order. When her fingers paused, even the Milky Way seemed to hold its breath. Before we follow that shining thread any farther, welcome to DrowZy Storyteller. Settle into the quiet place you have chosen and allow the night to become spacious around you. Our tale will cross a river of stars, but it begins with small things: a wooden shuttle, an old ox, 2 children's baskets, and 1 hairpin bright enough to divide heaven. Nothing here needs to hurry. The path waits under us, soft with grass and starlight. The weaver was called Junyu, a name that means the weaving girl. On clear summer nights, people on earth knew her as Vigar, the luminous star high in the northern sky. In the celestial household, she was a daughter of heaven, gifted with hands that could guide 100 delicate threads without tangling one. Her work clothed the sky itself. Dawn received gauze the color of peach skin. Evening received long violet bands. The white winter clouds were combed from softer fiber, while summer thunderheads were given deep hems heavy with rain. Her chamber stood beyond ordinary wind, where a terrace of pale stone overlooked the heavenly river called Tianhe. Mortals saw that river as the Milky Way, a broad dusting of light from one horizon to another. Up close it was said to make a low continuous sound like water passing over thousands of smooth pebbles. Celestial reeds grew along its banks. Their seed heads shone after dusk, and their reflections trembled in the current without ever breaking apart. Junyu's loom occupied the eastern side of her room. The frame was dark wood polished by years of touch. Small weights of jade kept the warp threads straight, and a shallow lacquer dish held pins, scissors, and chalk. She began before the first earthly rooster called. 1 bare foot pressed the treadle. The heddles opened, her shuttle crossed, returned, crossed again. Under her careful gaze, loose filaments became order. Yet skill did not prevent weariness. Sometimes Junyu lifted her eyes from the growing cloth and watched the far world below. She could distinguish smoke rising from breakfast fires, flooded rice fields holding pieces of sky, and narrow paths where people carried baskets home at dusk. Human lives appeared brief from heaven but not empty. Their tasks had beginnings and endings. A robe was finished and worn. A meal was cooked and shared. A gate closed when the family was safely inside. Above, there was always another length of sky to weave. The bolts of cloud cloth accumulated beside the wall, luminous and flawless. Praise came to her in formal phrases. No one asked whether the rhythm that ordered the heavens might also feel like loneliness to the person keeping it. On the night when that pale strand seemed to touch the mulberry tree, Junyu had stopped her shuttle halfway across the warp. Below her, unseen cattle bells sounded in a distant pasture. The notes arrived impossibly faint, carried by a wandering current of celestial air. She placed 2 fingers on the suspended thread and listened until the last bell faded. Far beneath that balcony, a young cowherd was searching for an animal slow to return at evening. He did not know that anyone above had heard the bell. Junyu did not know his name. Between them lay the full depth of the sky, and yet the smallest sound had already crossed it. Scene 2. The Weaver's Mourning. Morning in the celestial court did not burst into being. It unfolded by degrees as Junyu worked gold into the eastern edge of a cloud. First came pearl, then warm apricot, then 1 narrow seam of light. The finished brightness passed outward from her loom and reached the human world as dawn. Windows paled, birds shifted beneath eaves, and dew on bean leaves became briefly radiant. Several sisters worked in neighboring halls. Their looms possessed different voices. One clicked lightly like bamboo knocking in a breeze. Another gave a deep wooden murmur whenever the beater pressed a line of weft into place. Through open lattice screens the rhythms mingled, sometimes matching, sometimes separating. Servants carried baskets of spun fiber from room to room, their felted shoes nearly silent upon the cool floor. Junyu was the finest among them. She could place a silver edge around a storm cloud without making it harsh. She understood how much blue belonged in a winter twilight and how a single thread of yellow could warm an autumn afternoon. The heavenly household valued such precision because beauty and order were closely tied. A crooked season might leave seedlings exposed. Rain woven too tightly could fall for days. Work done in those rooms eventually touched roofs, rivers, orchards, and sleeping creatures below. Authority in that high realm belonged, in many tellings, to the Queen Mother of the West, Shi Wangmu. She kept the laws that separated star from field and immortal duty from mortal desire. Her court lay beyond terraces where peaches ripened over immense spans of time. Bronze bells hung beneath vermilion beams and cranes stepped through quiet courtyards. The Queen Mother's rules were not casual restrictions. They were believed to hold the sky in its shape. Junyu honored those rules. She tied back her sleeves each morning and inspected every spindle before sitting down. When a thread broke, she joined the ends so neatly that the repair vanished. When a younger sister grew frustrated, Junyu loosened the snag with a bone pick and showed her how to feel tension through the fingertips. Patience lived in her hands even when it had begun to leave her heart. At midday she ate beside the western window. Her bowl held pear slices, steamed millet, and a little clear broth fragrant with ginger. From there she could see the heavenly river moving past islands of cloud. On the opposite bank were halls whose roofs curved like wings. Beyond them the sky descended toward the human world in veils of blue. She often found herself wondering about the sound of rain from beneath a tiled roof rather than above it. One sister spoke of an earthly festival she had observed through a gap in the clouds. Lanterns had floated along a canal, each carrying a small flame. Another remembered women washing newly dyed cloth at a village landing. They had slapped the wet fabric against stones, laughing whenever the spray caught someone by surprise. The details were ordinary, which made them precious. No official report preserved the warmth of a kitchen wall or the smell of straw after rain. Junyu kept these glimpses quietly. She wove them into places no one inspected closely. A brown filament like a cattle path inside a sunset border, the green of young rice hidden under a fold of cloud, a tiny copper glint recalling lamplight on a household pot. Her cloth remained perfect by celestial standards. Only she knew that earth had entered it. Late one afternoon, 7 sisters were given leave to bathe in a clear lake below. The permission came with a return hour and a reminder that celestial garments must be guarded. Their robes carried the lightness needed to rise between realms. Folded on a bank, they might resemble silk. Worn upon the shoulders, they remembered heaven. The sisters prepared with cheerful care. They chose scented combs, small towels, and fresh sashes. Junyu held her own robe across both arms. Its surface shifted from pale blue to moon white as she moved. Beyond the doorway, the sky stair descended through clouds toward a valley she had studied for years. For the first time, the distance no longer looked endless. Scene 3. A house at the edge of the fields. On earth, Nyolang woke before sunrise because the old ox beside his house had begun to shift in the straw. The animal did not bellow or stamp. A wooden bell tied loosely at its neck gave one patient note, then another. That was enough. Nyolang opened his eyes beneath a patched quilt and listened to cold air slipping through a crack in the shutters. His house stood beyond the last clustered roofs of the village. It was small, with packed earth walls and a roof repaired in several shades of tile. A persimmon tree leaned over the yard. Beside the threshold sat a jar for rainwater, a worn hoe, and 2 pairs of sandals, though only one pair belonged to a person. Nyolang had placed the other pair there long ago out of habit, after a family absence had made the doorway seem too bare. He had been orphaned young and had lived for a time with an elder brother and his brother's wife. When the household divided, little came to Nyolang beyond the old ox, a cart with one uneven wheel and the few tools no one else wanted. Such divisions could be sharp, yet he carried no wish to sharpen them further. He led the ox away, repaired the empty dwelling near the fields, and learned how much quiet one person could fit inside a day. There were beans to stake, millet to weed, and irrigation channels to clear after every hard rain. In spring he pressed seeds into dark soil with his thumb. In summer he cut fodder beneath the buzzing heat. Autumn brought bundles to thresh on a swept patch of ground. Through winter evenings he twisted straw into rope while the ox breathed warmly on the other side of a low partition. Nyolang spoke to the animal as though conversation required only one human voice. He discussed the weather, the stubborn cart wheel, and the neighbor's rooster that announced dawn too early. If his bean seedlings looked poor, he admitted his worry. When the moon was fine, he said so. The ox listened with dark, steady eyes, chewing in a thoughtful rhythm. Their days possessed a companionship free of ceremony. At a stream crossing, Nyolang tested the stones before asking the ox to step. On steep paths, he walked beside the load instead of riding. He brushed burrs from the animal's hide and saved a portion of bean straw for winter. In return, the ox leaned patiently into the plough and found the homeward path even when evening fog covered the fields. One summer dusk, Nyolang noticed the star Vigar above the eastern ridge. An older farmer once told him that a gifted woman lived there, weaving celestial cloth. Nyolang had smiled at the story without dismissing it. Fieldwork taught him that invisible things could still be real. Water moving under dry ground, roots thickening in darkness, weather gathering beyond a hill. He watched the bright point until mosquitoes found his wrists. Nearby, another star shone across the pale band of the Milky Way. That was Altair, though Nyolang did not know the name people would later give it. He knew only that the two lights seemed near enough to notice each other and far enough to remain lonely. The ox turned its head toward the same sky. Its bell sounded once. Nyolang rubbed the broad place between its horns and said they should go inside before the dew grew heavy. After supper, he mended a torn shoulder on his work coat. His stitches were large and uneven, but they held. The needle flashed each time it passed near the lamp. He wondered, not sadly but with simple curiosity, what hands capable of clothing the sky would think of such a repair. Outside, frogs called from the irrigation ditch. A breeze brought the scent of river mud and flowering melon vines. High above the roof, a celestial stair had already begun to lower through the clouds, although no earthly eye could yet see it. Scene 4, the old ox speaks. The hottest days arrived with cicadas. Their sound filled the noon air until even the clay walls seemed to vibrate. Nyolang worked early, rested beneath the persimmon tree during the fiercest heat, then returned to the fields when shadows lengthened. The old ox moved more slowly that summer, choosing each step with care. One evening, the animal stopped beside a patch of silver grass instead of taking the usual path home. Its ears turned toward the western hills. Nyolang waited, assuming it had caught the scent of water or heard cattle farther off. The bell beneath its neck remained still. Then the ox spoke his name. The voice was low and rough, not unlike a millstone turning at a distance. Nyolang looked around for a traveler concealed in the grass. No one stood there. Dragonflies moved above the ditch, and the first bats traced dark curves against the afterglow. The ox spoke again, telling him there was no need to fear. Long before it had worn a harness, it had belonged to the upper world. Some said it was once a celestial being punished for breaking a rule. Others called it an earthly creature granted knowledge through long kindness. Whatever its beginning, it had waited for the proper night and the proper listener. Nyolang placed one hand against its warm shoulder. The familiar hide made the impossible voice easier to accept. He asked why the ox had kept silent through so many years of muddy roads and winter mornings. Because advice ripens like fruit, the animal answered. Given too early, it is hard and bitter. Given too late, it falls unused. The old ox told him that 7 heavenly sisters would descend at dusk to bathe in a secluded lake beyond the mulberry grove. Their robes would rest upon the grass. Among them would be Junyu, whose hands guided the colors of the sky. The ox said Nyolang's solitary life and her solitary labor had bent quietly toward the same meeting. The council included an action found in an old version of the tale. Nyolang was to take the pale celestial robe belonging to the weaver. Without it, she could not immediately return to heaven. Even in the hush beneath the cicadas, the instruction troubled him. A garment was not merely cloth if it carried someone home. The ox did not mock his hesitation. It lowered its great head and breathed across the grass. Ancient stories sometimes keep a rough knot at their center, and kindness is shown by how that knot is loosened. Nyolang was told to listen when Junyu spoke, to return the robe when she asked, and to understand that no shared life could be made from captivity. They continued toward the house as twilight deepened. Nyolang heard every familiar sound with unusual clarity. Water running between ridges, a pheasant settling in reeds, his own sandals brushing dust. The future no longer appeared empty, yet it did not appear simple. At home he filled the ox's trough and sat on the threshold without lighting a lamp. The lake lay beyond two low hills. He had gathered lotus roots near it but never visited at night. Willow branches concealed most of the shore, and white egrets nested in the marsh. He could remain home. The thought brought relief, followed by a quieter sorrow he could not explain. He could go and refuse the ox's stranger instruction. That seemed safer, though perhaps it would leave the intended meeting unopened. At last he decided only to walk to the grove and see what truth waited there. The ox lay down in fresh straw. Before closing its eyes, it warned Nyo Lang that heavenly hours passed differently from hours below. A short visit could alter many lives. Then its voice returned to ordinary breath, and no further answer came. Night gathered around the little house. Beyond the shutters, Vigar brightened. Nyo Lang slept lightly, dreaming of a shuttle crossing a river without touching the water. Scene 5, 7 robes on the grass. The next dusk was clear enough to reveal every fold in the distant hills. Nyo Lang finished watering the last row of beans, washed soil from his hands, and followed a narrow footpath toward the mulberry grove. He carried nothing except a cord for tying back branches and a gourd of water. The old ox watched from the yard, its grey muzzle resting over the gate. The path entered deeper shade. Mulberry leaves overlapped above him, broad and soft-edged. Fallen fruit stained the ground purple. As he neared the lake, the air cooled and the cicadas gave way to the small clicking calls of frogs. A brightness passed across the treetops without lightning. Nyo Lang crouched behind a screen of willow and looked upward. 7 figures descended along a stair that seemed to form beneath their feet, each step briefly visible inside a ribbon of cloud. Their sleeves floated as though under water. When the first sister touched earth, the grass leaned away from her slipper and then slowly rose. The women placed folded robes upon a clean stone near the shore. One garment gleamed pale green, another held the pink of peach blossom, and a third carried tiny points like distant frost. Junyu's robe was moon-white with a blue depth hidden in its folds. No jewel marked it. Its quiet light was enough. The sisters entered the lake behind veils of lotus leaves and trailing mist. Their laughter traveled over the water, mingling with splashes and the startled wings of a heron. Nyo Lang stayed beneath the willow, suddenly ashamed of being present where no one expected him. He meant to withdraw. At that moment, a breath of wind lifted the edge of Junyu's robe and carried it from the stone. It settled several paces away near Nyo Lang's hiding place. The cloth was within reach. The old instruction returned to him with all its discomfort. He picked up the robe, not to keep it, he told himself, but to prevent it from falling into mud. Yet instead of placing it openly on the stone, he stepped deeper among the reeds. The choice was small in motion and large in consequence. Soon the sisters emerged. Water shone along their hair as they dressed. 6 robes rose lightly when fastened, gathering the evening air beneath their sleeves. Junyu searched the stone, then the grass. Her face changed from amusement to alarm. The return hour approached. Her sisters spread outward, checking under willow roots and among lotus stems. Junyu called once, and the note of her voice made Nyo Lang understand that his silence had become a harm. He stepped from the reeds, holding the folded garment on both palms. The sisters drew close around Junyu. Nyo Lang bowed so quickly that the water gourd knocked against his knee. He confessed that the robe had blown near him, that he had delayed returning it, and that the delay was wrong. He placed it upon the flat stone and moved away. Junyu studied him. Anger warmed her cheeks, but fear began to leave them when she saw the robe was unspoiled. She lifted it and asked why he had come. Nyo Lang could not answer with destiny or the advice of a talking ox. Both sounded like excuses. He said truthfully that he had heard of the celestial weaver and had wanted to know whether a person lived behind the bright star. He added that curiosity did not give him the right to interfere with her leaving. The sisters urged Junyu to dress before the stare vanished. She slipped the robe over her shoulders. Light gathered at its hem, yet she did not immediately rise. She asked Nio Long about the mud on his trousers, the calluses on his palms, and the wooden bell she could faintly hear from beyond the grove. He told her about the fields and the old ox waiting at home. Their conversation lasted only moments by the lake, but the sky stare thinned. One sister took Junyu's hand, another warned that they must go. Junyu looked toward heaven, then toward the darkening path through the mulberries. She had recovered the power to leave. The choice before her was therefore truly hers. Scene 6. The choice beneath the willows. 6 sisters rose with the last visible steps of cloud. Their colored robes became narrow streams of light, then vanished among the first stars. Junyu remained beside the lake, celestial garment fastened and fully able to follow. Above the trees, the stair waited one breath longer. She did not take it. The luminous steps dissolved. Ordinary twilight closed over the grove, soft and blue. Junyu stood with one hand on the willow trunk, feeling bark ridges beneath fingers accustomed to silk. Nio Long remained several paces away. Neither spoke until a frog leaped from the bank with a plop so commonplace that they both smiled. Junyu asked whether he understood what she had surrendered for that night. Nio Long said he could not understand it yet, but he would not pretend the cost was small. He offered to guide her back to the lake whenever she wished to seek a return. The robe remained around her shoulders, no hand but hers touched its fastening. They walked toward the valley. Night scents rose from warm ground, crushed mint near the stream, damp roots, smoke from cooking fires. Junyu paused often. She had seen mountains from above but never watched a beetle push through sand or heard water inside an irrigation gate. A spiderweb caught moonlight between 2 reeds. She bent close enough to see droplets trembling at each crossing. Nio Long answered her questions as best he could. The narrow terraces belonged to 3 families who shared the spring. The low roof beyond the poplars covered a mill. Fireflies appeared after the first strong heat of summer. When she asked why the path curved around an empty mound, he admitted that he did not know. It had always done so. At the house, the old ox was standing. Junyu approached it without surprise, as though celestial weavers expected animals to hold hidden histories. She touched its forehead and called it by a name Nio Long had never heard. The ox bowed one knee. For a moment the yard seemed connected to a much older place. Inside, Nio Long lit the clay lamp. The room revealed its poverty without disguise. A narrow bed platform, a table repaired with pegs, 2 stools of different heights, and a cooking pot blackened by years of use. Junyu removed her shining outer robe and folded it carefully into a cedar chest. Underneath she wore a simple garment the color of cloud shadow. Nio Long prepared millet porridge, apologizing because there was little else. Junyu tasted it with pickled greens and found the warmth comforting. Celestial meals had been delicate and fragrant, but none had required someone to blow upon a spoon before handing it to her. They spoke until the lamp wick bent low. Junyu described the endless bolts of sky cloth and the laws governing her household. Nio Long explained how his family had divided and why the old ox was more companion than property. No pledge was demanded, no future was settled before sleep. Junyu rested on the bed platform while Nio Long took a mat beside the ox. Through the open window she could see Vigar, her own star, burning in the place she had left. It looked unchanged. That steadiness was strangely painful and strangely freeing. At dawn she woke to the scrape of a broom in the yard. Nio Long was sweeping fallen persimmon leaves into a pile. The ox chewed hay. A neighbor's chimney released one straight column of smoke into still air. Junyu opened the cedar chest and lifted her celestial robe. Its surface brightened beneath her hands. She could search for a road upward, perhaps find her sisters, perhaps resume the half-finished cloth waiting at her loom. She folded the robe again, laid a sprig of dried lavender between its layers, and closed the lid. When she stepped outside, Nio Long stopped sweeping. Junyu asked whether the village had a loom she might use. He pointed toward an abandoned frame stored in the shed, warped by damp and missing a treadle. She examined it with growing interest. By breakfast they were discussing repairs. Choice had not removed uncertainty, but it had given the morning a direction. Sunlight reached across the yard and warmed the rough wooden frame, where one loose thread stirred in the breeze. Scene 7, a loom repaired with pear wood. The abandoned loom had belonged to an aunt who moved south many years before. Dust lay thick on its beams, and mice had carried away part of the old reed binding. One upright had cracked near the base. The treadle was gone entirely, leaving only a polished hollow where its cord once passed. Junyu ran her hands over the frame, learning its proportions. It was heavier than her celestial loom and less exact, built by a village carpenter from Elm. Yet the joints were sound. She said it could work again. Nyolang found a length of seasoned pear wood behind the shed. They measured it with a knotted cord, then shaped a new treadle using an adze and knife. Junyu held the wood steady while he cut. Pale curls fell around their feet, releasing a clean, sweet smell. Whenever his blade approached her fingers, he stopped and asked her to shift her grip. For the heddle rods, they split bamboo. A neighbor gave them spare reed in exchange for help clearing a blocked ditch. Junyu twisted fresh cords from hemp and showed Nyolang how each loop must lift the warp without rubbing it. He understood plow lines better than thread paths, but both depended on straightness, tension, and knowing when not to force resistant material. By the third evening, the loom stood inside the front room. Junyu tied on a practice warp of ordinary flax. Her first press of the new treadle produced a creak that startled sparrows from the persimmon tree. The shuttle crossed unevenly. She adjusted one cord, rubbed wax along another, and tried again. The second shed opened cleanly. The loom answered her foot and hands with a plain, earthly clatter. Nothing glowed. No dawn spread across a continent. A strip of brown cloth began at the breast beam, narrow enough for a sash. Junyu laughed. Nyolang had heard celestial sisters laugh upon the lake, but this sound belonged to the room and the flawed machine. It made the clay lamp seem brighter. He sat nearby mending a basket, careful not to interrupt the developing rhythm. News of the skilled stranger traveled through the village. Women brought tangled yarn, difficult patterns, and cloth that pulled crooked at one edge. Junyu never claimed divine knowledge. She sat beside each loom, touched the warp, and found the practical cause. Sometimes the answer was a new knot. Sometimes a beam had swollen in damp weather. Sometimes tired hands simply needed tea and rest. Payment came as eggs, cabbage, sesame oil, or small coils of thread. Their shelves slowly filled. Nyolang repaired the roof above the loom so rain would not stain finished work. Junyu planted indigo beside the wall and learned which local bark gave a warm yellow dye. Their affection grew inside these shared tasks. He saved the smoothest pear wood for her shuttles. She reinforced the knees of his work trousers before they tore. They learned each other's silences, his quiet after visiting his brother's household, hers when evening exposed the star she had left. Near the autumn moon festival, they married with little ceremony. A red cloth hung over the gate. Neighbors carried bowls and stools into the yard. Someone borrowed a drum, someone else arrived with a jar of rice wine. The old ox wore a garland of asters between its horns and endured the attention with grave patience. Junyu and Nyolang bowed to heaven and earth, then to one another. When she raised her head after the first bow, Vigar had just appeared. Across the Milky Way, Altair shone above the southern roofline. The stars had not yet become symbols of separation. They looked like two lamps set out to mark the edges of a generous night. After the guests left, the couple found grains of rice scattered across the floor and a forgotten red ribbon tied to the ox's stall. They cleaned slowly, exchanging small smiles. The repaired loom waited in the next room with half a length of cloth rolled around its beam. Tomorrow would contain work. That, to both of them, felt like a promise. Scene 8, Cloth, Furrows, and Rain. Marriage settled around the house through repetition rather than ceremony. Nyolang rose when the ox stirred. Junyu woke to the first dipper striking the water jar. Some mornings they spoke at once. On others they moved comfortably through an hour before either needed words. The field and loom gave their days two interlacing rhythms. Outdoors, the plough opened dark furrows that curved with the slope. Indoors, the shuttle laid one coloured line beside another. Nyolang learned to recognize the moment Junyu's thread tension had gone wrong by the change in the loom's sound. Junyu could tell whether the soil was ready for seed from the amount of mud clinging to his ankles. Spring demanded everything together. Mulberry buds opened, irrigation gates needed patching, and silkworm trays arrived from a neighbor. Tiny larvae ate with a sound like fine rain on paper. Junyu spread fresh leaves several times a day, removing wilted stems with chopsticks. Nyolang came in from sewing to help, his large fingers unexpectedly gentle among the fragile bodies. When the silkworms spun their cocoons, the room acquired rows of pale oval forms. Junyu reeled the fiber into shining strands over warm water. Earthly silk resisted more than celestial thread. It caught on rough skin and snapped if pulled impatiently. She came to value its limits. Cloth made from vulnerable cocoons carried the memory of care. Summer rain arrived one afternoon while Nyolang was still beyond the western ridge. Junyu saw the first dark line under the clouds and felt an old instinct to reach for her heavenly loom. In the upper world, she might once have guided that grey into an even veil. Here she could only bring washing under the eaves, close the shutters, and wait. The storm crossed the valley with warm, heavy drops. Water drummed on the repaired tiles. A leak appeared above the table, then another near the chest. Junyu set bowls underneath. She began laughing when the largest bowl filled faster than she could empty it. Nyolang returned drenched, leading the ox through sheets of water. Together they rubbed the animal dry with straw and checked the barn roof. Lightning whitened the doorway, but thunder came slowly from far hills. Later they ate noodles while rain threaded the darkness outside. Junyu told him she had often wondered how weather sounded beneath a roof. Now she knew it had many voices. Drops striking tile were firm and hollow. Rain on persimmon leaves made softer taps. Water pouring from a broken gutter had the fullness of a stream. The old ox shook its ears whenever spray blew into the stall. During clear weather their work travelled beyond the village. Merchants bought Junyu's light summer cloth and thick winter weave. She refused offers that would have required a large workshop. The loom by the eastern wall was enough. She preferred knowing who had spun the thread and whose child might wear the finished coat. Nyolang's fields improved. He planted beans after millet to restore the soil, spread compost before winter, and repaired a stone channel that had lost water for years. The old ox pulled steadily, though white had begun to gather around its eyes. At dusk the couple met beside the well. He washed earth from his arms while she rinsed dye from hers. Indigo tinted the creases of her fingers. Mud remained beneath his nails despite scrubbing. Their hands looked marked by different labors, yet each recognized the other as a record of the same household. One evening, a low cloud formed above the valley with a silver lining of unusual delicacy. Junyu studied it from the doorway. Perhaps one of her sisters had woven that edge. Perhaps the celestial loom continued without any remembrance of her. Nyolang did not ask which thought had saddened her. He warmed 2 cups of tea and placed one within reach. The cloud moved east. After it passed, a clean patch of sky revealed Vigar. The star seemed remote, but the tea was hot between Junyu's palms and the repaired roof smelled of rain. Scene 9, the first small cradle. Winter withdrew from the valley in muddy steps. Ice released the irrigation ditches, willow buds showed a haze of green, and the persimmon tree dropped the last shriveled fruit it had kept through cold weather. Inside the house, Nyolang built a cradle from poplar boards. He tested every surface with his palm. Corners were rounded, pegs driven flush, and the rockers widened so the cradle could not tip. Junyu wove a soft lining from undyed cotton. She placed no celestial symbol upon it, only a border of little seed shapes that repeated without being identical. Their daughter was born during an early rain. A village midwife came with clean cloths and a bundle of mugwort. Nyolang waited in the yard, where every drop falling from the eaves seemed to take an hour. The old ox stood near him without eating. At last the midwife opened the door and told him both mother and child were well. The room smelled of warm water, herbs, and the faint smoke of the lamp. Junyu lay beneath a quilt, tired beyond anything her heavenly labor had required. Beside her, the infant's dark hair formed a soft, uneven cap. Nyolang approached as if entering a shrine. The baby opened one hand, closed it around the edge of his finger, and altered the size of the world. His fields, the village, and even the roof of stars seemed to draw inward toward that tiny grip. They gave the child a household name connected to spring rain. At night, Junyu nursed her beside the loom while moonlight rested on the floor. The shuttle remained still for several weeks. No law demanded that she continue, and no cloud failed because she slept through a work hour. This freedom included exhaustion, tenderness, and days when nothing was completed beyond warming food. Nyolang carried the infant in a cloth sling while feeding the ox. He learned to walk with a softer gait. If she cried beside the field, he described each task aloud. This seed is millet, this hoe breaks the crust, this water comes from the upper spring. His explanations made no sense to her yet, but the cadence often brought sleep. Junyu fashioned toys from scraps. A silk fish hung above the cradle, turning whenever air entered through the window. Small stuffed birds perched along the rail. One had black and white wings like a magpie, though at the time it was merely a cheerful shape made from leftover cloth. Their son arrived 2 years later under a high autumn sky. By then the cradle showed tooth marks along one edge and a stain where pear broth had spilled. Nyolang sanded the boards again. Junyu replaced the lining with a thicker weave and let their daughter help choose the border color. The boy possessed a solemn gaze and a strong dislike of cold water. His sister tried to comfort him by bringing pebbles, spoons, and once a sleeping caterpillar. The house that had held so much quiet now contained sudden laughter, dropped bowls, and footsteps crossing rooms before dawn. Junyu sometimes thought of her celestial sisters. She wished they could see the children's faces, yet she feared what notice from heaven might bring. Her robe remained folded in the cedar chest beneath winter blankets. She had not worn it since choosing the earthly path. One night their daughter pointed through the window at Vigar and asked why that star was so bright. Junyu said a loom had once stood near it. The child wanted to know whether the loom was lonely. "Wood and thread do not feel loneliness," Junyu replied. Then she glanced at Nyolang, who was rocking the cradle with one bare foot. People may lend their feelings to the places they leave. The girl considered this and asked whether the person would ever return. Junyu tucked the quilt under her chin. She said some journeys wait until the traveler knows what home means in more than one place. Outside, a pair of magpies settled in the persimmon branches. Their long tails crossed against the moon. Neither bird called. They simply stayed until both children had gone to sleep. Scene 10. The family year. Years in the valley could be counted by height marks cut into a doorpost. The lowest belonged to their daughter at 3, standing on tiptoe despite being told to keep her heels down. A second notch recorded their son's first confident spring. Above those, the marks climbed in small irregular intervals, each accompanied by a date Nyolang scratched with the point of a nail. The children knew their mother as a weaver, not a star. To them, her most remarkable ability was finding the beginning of any knot. They brought her tangled kite string, snarled fishing line, and cords pulled from bundles. Junyu loosened each one patiently, asking them to hold the free ends. Their father seemed capable of repairing everything outdoors. He replaced tool handles, splinted saplings, and turned stones into a low wall around the vegetable bed. His daughter followed with a miniature basket. His son rode the patient ox until the animal reached a slope where Nyo-lang always lifted him down. At New Year, the family pasted red paper near the door, swept the yard, and cooked dumplings. Junyu shaped hers into neat crescents. Nyo-lang's looked like folded bundles. The children made tiny ones that opened in the pot and released their filling into the broth. Everyone ate them anyway. Spring brought silkworms and the smell of turned earth. Summer placed sleeping mats beneath the coolest window. In autumn they hung persimmons from the eaves, where the fruit wrinkled and sweetened. Winter evenings gathered all 4 people around the brazier. Junyu spun thread while Nyo-lang told stories about animals that argued over who had made the moon. Sometimes the old ox corrected him. The children accepted the speaking animal more easily than their father had. They climbed into the straw and asked about heaven. The ox answered rarely, claiming that too much celestial information would make earthly porridge grow cold. It described a river whose pebbles were stars, a peach garden where blossoms took centuries to open, and bells that could be heard only by cranes. Junyu listened from the doorway. She never stopped the stories, but her shuttle occasionally slowed. The ox omitted the laws of Shi Wang Mu and the unfinished obligations left above. It gave the children wonder without fear. On market days, the family walked together into town. Nyo-lang carried cloth over one shoulder. Junyu held their son's hand while the older child counted bridge planks. Vendors sold ginger, pottery, combs, lamp oil, and bright lengths of ribbon. Steam rose from baskets of buns. A metalworker's hammer rang from a shaded stall. Junyu studied ordinary craftsmanship with lasting pleasure. A bowl balanced well in the hand because an unknown potter had trimmed its foot carefully. A basket endured because every third strip crossed at a different angle. Heavenly objects had appeared flawless, but earthly things revealed the decisions that made them useful. The family bought a small brass mirror one year. Its polished face gave an imperfect reflection, warm and slightly blurred. Junyu preferred it to the clear celestial mirrors she remembered. When her daughter stood beside her, their features mingled at the edge like 2 colors woven close. Far above, however, changes had begun to show. Morning clouds arrived later. Certain sunset borders lacked Junyu's delicate finish. Her sisters covered the work, but the missing rhythm could not be hidden forever. Questions traveled from hall to hall until they reached the keepers of celestial order. No thunder warned the valley. The family continued planting, weaving, eating, and measuring the children against the doorpost. Danger did not enter as a storm. It approached first as a clerk opening an old register and noticing that one name had remained absent for many earthly years. That evening the old ox refused its grain. Nyo-lang offered fresh water and checked its hooves. Junyu knelt beside its shoulder, where the hide had become thin over bone. The animal looked toward the brightening sky. Its silence carried a knowledge the others were not ready to hear. Scene 11. The Ox's Last Gift. Age came gently for the ox but did not pass it by. Its steps shortened. The bell that once sounded from distant pasture now remained close to the yard. Nyo-lang stopped hitching it to the plow and built a shaded pen beneath the persimmon tree, where flies were fewer and family voices could be heard through the open door. The children brought handfuls of tender grass. Their daughter combed loose hair from its forehead with a wooden comb. Their son reported each new cloud as though the ox might need a weather account. The animal listened, eyes half closed, storing their words somewhere beyond reply. One cool morning it asked Nyo-lang and Junyu to sit nearby. The voice had weakened to a deep breath shaped into language. Junyu brought a folded blanket for the children, and all 4 gathered in the straw. The ox said its earthly life was nearing completion. Nyo-lang objected immediately, offering better fodder, a healer, or herbs from the southern market. The animal waited until his promises ran out. Some doors, it said, open in a single direction, and kindness cannot close them. Kindness can make the threshold peaceful. It then gave an instruction stranger than the first. After death, its hide should be preserved. If disaster descended from heaven, Niolong must wrap it around his shoulders. The old celestial power held within the hide would allow him to cross air as if crossing a field. Niolong recoiled from the thought. He could not imagine turning his companion into a tool. The ox reminded him that a gift freely offered was different from a thing taken. The distinction landed quietly between them, touching an old memory beside the lake. Junyu asked what danger was coming. The ox's ears moved toward the sky. Her absence had been discovered. Messengers would descend when the celestial court completed its deliberation. The rules above considered her marriage a disorder that must be corrected. Their daughter began to cry without fully understanding. She pressed her face against the ox's neck. The younger child asked whether heaven had no room for a cottage. The ox answered that large realms sometimes overlook the size of happiness. It told them not to hate the stars. Stars were lights, not judges, and rivers were paths until someone made them borders. During the following days, the family stayed close. Niolong slept in the pen. Junyu cooked soft mash and rubbed the animal's aching joints with warm cloths. The children decorated the stall with late chrysanthemums. No one pretended the ox would recover, but each ordinary service became a way of saying what speech could not hold. At dusk on the 7th day, the animal asked to see the valley. Niolong opened the gate. The ox did not have strength to walk far, so they cleared the view toward the fields. Harvest stubble glowed bronze. Smoke lay flat above the village roofs. The irrigation stream carried the reflection of one early star. The old companion breathed out slowly. Its bell gave a final faint note when its head settled into the straw. The sound was smaller than a falling seed. They buried the ox on a rise above the house, beneath wild grasses that moved in every wind. Niolong followed its instruction with grief and reverence, preserving the hide separately before covering the grave. Junyu stitched a plain cloth around it and stored it on a high shelf. The wooden bell hung from the persimmon tree. For several mornings, Niolong woke expecting the familiar note. Silence entered before memory corrected him. He went to the fields alone, carrying the plough handles over one shoulder, but left the earth unturned. Junyu found him sitting at the boundary stone and sat beside him until noon. That autumn they did less. The harvest was modest. Cloth accumulated slowly on the loom. The children left bowls of clean water near the grave and replaced them when leaves fell in. Winter stars sharpened above the roof. One night the bell in the persimmon tree moved without wind. It sounded once not as a warning, but as if something old had kept one final promise to remain near. Scene 12, a summons from the High Court. In the celestial halls, Junyu's empty loom stood beneath a cover of white cloth. Dust could not gather there, yet absence had a texture of its own. The treadle rested at the angle where her foot had left it. A shuttle remained caught midway through a pattern that no sister wished to finish. Officials examined registers, compared earthly seasons with heavenly work cycles, and carried their findings beneath gates painted with clouds. The matter reached Shiwangmu. Whether she was Junyu's mother, grandmother, or sovereign changes across tellings, in every form she represented the boundary Junyu had crossed. The Queen Mother sat near an open terrace where ancient peach branches cast narrow shadows. A phoenix-shaped lamp burned without smoke. She listened while an attendant recited the years of absence, the uncompleted duties, and reports of a marriage below. No simple cruelty moved her. She believed order protected both realms. Stars did not abandon their stations, rivers kept to their beds, seasons returned because each being honored an allotted place. If celestial daughters could set aside eternal work whenever mortal affection called, what promise would hold the upper sky together? Yet rules viewed from a throne can make a kitchen disappear. The report mentioned no cradle, no mended trousers, no old ox buried above a bean field. It did not record two children whose faces joined heaven and earth. Registers preserve categories more easily than tenderness. Shi Wangmu sent attendants to retrieve Jun Yu. They descended one grey morning hidden inside a bank of cloud. The valley dogs whimpered. Birds fell quiet along the hedges. Frost appeared briefly on summer grass. Jun Yu was winding blue thread when the loom stopped beneath her hands. She felt the upper air enter the room before anyone knocked. Her celestial robe brightened inside the cedar chest, shining through blankets and wood. 3 attendants stood in the yard. Their garments held no dust despite the earthly path. The leader carried a narrow tablet bearing the seal of the High Court. She bowed to Jun Yu with formal respect and announced that the weaver girl must resume her station before the next dawn. Niao Lang came from the field carrying a hoe. The children ran behind him. He placed himself beside Jun Yu, not in front of her, and asked whether the summons allowed her family to come. The attendant's gaze softened for one brief instant. Mortal husband and mortal children had no place in the celestial weaving halls. The law recognized no household formed through an unauthorized descent. Jun Yu replied that a law's refusal to recognize her family did not erase them. Her voice remained calm, but the thread around her fingers drew tight enough to leave a red line. She asked for time to prepare the children. 1 hour was granted. Inside, the family moved through unbearable practicalities. Jun Yu packed warm clothes for the children before remembering they were not permitted to follow. Niao Lang filled a travel flask she might not need. Their daughter held the celestial robe and refused to release it. The younger child crawled beneath the loom as if a wooden frame could hide them all. Jun Yu knelt and gathered both children close. She told them to remember the feel of thread, the sound of water at the gate, and the fact that every star appears to tremble when seen through moving air. She promised that distance would not make her stop being their mother. Niao Lang opened the chest. Together they unfolded the robe she had once freely put away. Its pale surface filled the dim room with the color of early morning. He fastened it at her shoulders because her hands were shaking. Outside, cloud had lowered to the persimmon branches. The bell of the old ox began to sway. Jun Yu looked up at its dry wooden curve, then toward the high shelf where the cloth-wrapped hide had waited through winter. The attendants extended their sleeves. A stare of cold light formed above the yard. Jun Yu embraced Niao Lang once, fiercely and without graceful words. Then celestial wind gathered around her robe, lifting its hem. The children cried out as their mother's feet left the earth. The sound followed her above the roof, above the persimmon tree, and into the cloud where the strict road home had opened. Scene 13, the ascent through cloud. Jun Yu rose faster than falling rain travels downward. The house diminished beneath her, first a complete little square, then a brown mark beside green fields, then nothing she could distinguish from the folds of earth. The attendants held their formation on either side. Their long sashes pointed toward the world she was leaving. Cold gathered as they entered the cloud. Droplets silvered Jun Yu's hair. She could no longer hear the children, though memory repeated their cries with painful accuracy. One attendant offered a cloth for her face. Jun Yu did not take it. She wanted the wind to keep her awake. They passed the height of migrating geese. A flock moved below in an arrow shape, each bird accepting the small burden of the air disturbed by the one ahead. Junyu watched until mist covered them. Even birds crossed enormous distances together. The sky stair emerged above the cloud layer. Its steps were translucent and dry, lit from within by a blue flame. At intervals stood gates shaped from pearl-colored vapor. The attendants presented the tablet at each one. Locks opened with tones like stone chimes. When the final gate parted, the celestial terraces appeared unchanged. Cranes walked beside the same pools. Peach petals lay where no wind had scattered them. Bells beneath the eaves kept their measured intervals. The perfection that once felt ordinary now seemed sealed and airless. Junyu's sisters waited outside the weaving hall. They embraced her before officials could object. One touched the roughened places on her fingertips, amazed that earthly silk could leave such marks. Another found a tiny millet husk caught in the hem of the celestial robe and closed her hand around it as if receiving a jewel. Questions crowded close. Were the children healthy? Did rain truly roar on roof tiles? Had she forgotten the 100-thread crossing? Junyu answered only the first. Her daughter had a patient mind. Her son disliked cold water. Both were waiting below. The loom cover was removed. Her unfinished pattern showed a dawn interrupted halfway through its golden border. Junyu sat on the old bench. The wood supported her body at a remembered angle, but her feet searched for the heavier treadle Nyo Lang had carved from pear. She began to weave under supervision. The celestial shuttle moved with effortless speed. Thread obeyed before she pulled it. A radiant cloud formed beyond the window and traveled toward Earth. Everyone praised the return of order. Junyu felt no satisfaction. Earthly fiber had taught her that resistance gave information. A snag asked for attention. An uneven edge revealed a tired hand. This flawless material concealed every feeling of the person working it. At the High Court, she was ordered to set aside her mortal attachment. Shi Wangmu spoke of balance, station, and consequences. Junyu listened without lowering her eyes. She said she would weave because neglected weather might harm innocent fields. She would not agree that love had been a mistake. The Queen Mother's expression remained still. Duty could be compelled, inward consent could not. Junyu was dismissed to her chamber where lattice doors closed behind her. Night came to heaven differently. Darkness rose from the human world and filled the spaces between stars. Junyu stood on her balcony above Tianhe. The heavenly river flowed as before, bright pebbles turning in its depths. Across its broad current shone Altair. That star had once been merely another light. Now it held the direction of a tiled roof, a persimmon tree, and 3 people who might be looking upward. Junyu pressed both hands against the balcony rail. Far below, Nyo Lang unfolded the hide of the old ox. Celestial wind, hidden for years within its fibers, awakened and filled the room with the scent of distant grass. Scene 14, 2 baskets rising. The cloud closed after Junyu, leaving the yard suddenly warm and bright. Nyo Lang stood with his face lifted until his eyes watered. The children clung to his coat. Above them, the old bell swung, though the air at ground level was still. He remembered the ox's instruction. From the high shelf, he took the cloth bundle and laid it across the table. His hands hesitated at the knot. The hide beneath was clean, preserved with cedar and salt, marked by the familiar grey colouring he had brushed for years. Grief returned with such force that he had to sit. The older child placed her palm beside his. She said the ox had meant them to use the gift. Her certainty belonged to childhood, where promises from speaking animals required no proof. Nyolang nodded and stood again. He wrapped the hide over his shoulders. It settled like a heavy cloak. For one breath nothing happened. Then the wooden bell outside gave a clear note and the weight disappeared. A current moved upward through the room, lifting loose thread, ash from the brazier, and 3 dried persimmon leaves from the sill. Nyolang prepared 2 carrying baskets, the same kind used for vegetables on market days. He padded each with quilts and tied the lids open. His daughter climbed into one, holding the brass mirror and a red ribbon. His son entered the other with a stuffed silk fish tucked inside his coat. The carrying pole balanced across Nyolang's shoulders. 1 basket rose at either end, joined by ordinary bamboo. He checked every knot twice. The children were frightened, so he gave them familiar tasks. His daughter would watch the eastern side. His son would watch the west. Both should call if a cord loosened. They stepped into the yard. Celestial wind caught beneath the ox hide. Dust circled Nyolang's ankles, then fell away. His sandals left the ground. The first moments were unsteady. The baskets tilted as the children leaned toward the view. Nyolang asked them to sit centered, just as they did when crossing a footbridge. He gripped the bamboo pole and thought of plow handles guiding a line through resistant soil. The roof sank below. Fields opened into shapes the children had never seen. Terraces like broad green steps, channels flashing between them, roads no wider than thread. Villagers emerged from doorways and shaded their eyes. No one could decide whether they had witnessed a family rising or 3 birds hidden inside a cloud. They entered the cold mist through which Junyu had passed. Moisture darkened Nyolang's hair. The children called to each other from their baskets, reporting that they were safe. His daughter held the red ribbon outside, and its free end streamed toward heaven. At the height of geese, they found the flock still traveling. The birds shifted around the unusual travelers without breaking formation. 1 feather spun past the boy's basket. He reached for it, then remembered his father's warning and kept both hands inside. The old hide knew a path that Nyolang did not. It climbed through pearl gates moments before they closed. Celestial guards heard the wooden bell echo where no cattle should walk. By the time a message reached the high court, the family had crossed into the upper sky. Junyu felt them coming before she saw them. The warp threads beneath her fingers began to hum. She ran from the loom room to the outer terrace, startling attendants who had never seen the weaver girl abandon a shuttle in motion. Below the terrace, a grey shape rose against the luminous air. 2 baskets swayed from a bamboo pole. Her children called upward. Nyolang's face appeared between them, pale from effort and bright with hope. Junyu reached over the rail. The distance narrowed rapidly. Her fingers could almost touch the red ribbon trailing from her daughter's hand. Across the courtyard, Shi Wangmu had also seen. She removed the long hairpin from her dark hair. Its metal point carried a cold, unmistakable light. Scene 15, the hairpin and the river. The Queen Mother stepped to the edge of the terrace. Her loosened hair moved behind her like a black banner. No attendant spoke. Even the bronze bells fell silent beneath the eaves. With one deliberate motion, Shi Wangmu drew the point of her hairpin across the empty sky. At first the mark was thin, a white scratch between Junyu and the rising baskets. Then light poured into it. The line widened into a channel, the channel deepened, and a rushing current filled the divide. Starry water unfurled from horizon to horizon. Tianhe, the heavenly river, had become a boundary. Nyolang stopped so suddenly that both baskets swung forward. He planted his feet upon a small bank of cloud that formed under the ox hide. Junyu stood on the opposite shore, closer than a shouted word and farther than any road on earth. The children reached toward her. Their voices crossed the river, but their bodies could not. Between them, bright currents turned with immense slow force. Pebbles of light rolled along the bed. Wisps of star mist lifted from the surface and vanished. Niolong searched upstream and down. The river had no visible ford. He lowered one end of the carrying pole, then the other, helping the children step onto the cloud bank. His daughter still held the red ribbon. She tied it to a slender reed, hoping their mother could see its earthly color. Junyu pleaded with the Queen Mother. She offered years of labor, finer clouds, and every skill her hands possessed. She asked only that the family remain together while she worked. Shi Wangmu answered that consequence followed broken order as shadow follows form. The river would preserve the separation between the celestial weaver and mortal cowherd. Her voice did not rise, yet its finality chilled the luminous air. Niolong knelt at the water's edge and dipped his fingers into Tianhe. The current was colder than snow melt. It pressed against his hand with the weight of distance. The ox hide allowed him to stand among stars, but its gift could not defeat a river drawn by sovereign power. The younger child placed his silk fish upon the surface. For a moment it floated toward Junyu, then an eddy turned it sideways and returned it to the same bank. Niolong caught the toy before it drifted away. Their daughter lifted the brass mirror. She angled it until light flashed across the water. Junyu answered with her shuttle, tilting its polished tip. Two small signals passed back and forth over the untouchable current. As celestial night deepened, the family took their places in the sky. Junyu's light settled as Vigar on one side. Niolong became Altair across the river. Near him, two smaller stars were said to be the children or the baskets that had carried them upward. The bamboo pole rested along the bank, forever balanced. People below looked up and saw the new meaning written there. The Milky Way no longer seemed an empty brightness. It was the water between members of one household. Vigar and Altair faced each other across it, clear on summer nights, each holding a vigil the other could see. Shi Wangmu replaced the hairpin. Her dark hair became orderly again, yet the line she had drawn could not erase affection. It gave love a visible distance, and every creature capable of looking upward could witness it. When dawn approached, Junyu returned to her loom. Niolong gathered the children beneath the shelter of a cloud. Across Tianhe, the red ribbon stirred on its reed. Its color remained vivid against the cold river light. Scene 16. Vigar and Altair keep watch. Separation changed the measure of time. On earth, one day followed another through meals, chores, and sleep. Beside Tianhe, the same span could feel both brief and immense. Junyu counted mornings by finished cloud borders. Niolong counted them by the changing shapes he could recognize in the world below. He built a small shelter on the western bank using driftwood caught among celestial reeds. The children slept on quilts from their baskets. Their brass mirror hung near the entrance, and the stuffed fish rested beside the boy's pillow. Familiar objects gave the impossible shore the beginning of a home. Niolong had no field to cultivate there. He tended patches of star grass and learned which luminous roots could be cooked. Water from Tianhe was too cold to drink directly, so he filled a clay jar and left it beneath moonlight until its sharpness softened. Work, however strange, kept his hands steady. Across the river, Junyu resumed weaving. The High Court received its clouds on time, but close observers noticed new details. Rain veils sometimes carried fine diagonal lines like those on the valley's roof. Sunset cloth showed persimmon orange. A winter cloud might hold the exact grey of the old ox's muzzle. The family developed quiet ways to communicate. Junyu tied coloured threads to reeds along her bank. Blue meant she was well. Yellow recalled the harvest. Red said what one colour could not contain. Nyolang answered with smoke from a tiny brazier, choosing dry leaves for pale signals and fragrant cedar for darker ones. The children sent messages through reflections. At sunset, their daughter caught Vigar's light in the brass mirror and moved it 3 times. Their son arranged shining pebbles into rough animals. His celestial cow had 5 legs, which he defended as necessary for balance near a river of stars. Some nights mist covered Tianhe, then no signal crossed. Junyu sat beside her silent loom, listening for the wooden bell that had risen with Nyolang. He kept it beneath the shelter eave. If the air was favorable, one low note traveled over the water. Down in the valley, neighbors cared for the abandoned house. They harvested what remained, closed the shutters before storms, and kept weeds from swallowing the path. No one moved the loom. Dust softened its beams. The height marks on the doorpost remained visible. Travelers began to hear the story. They carried it beyond the valley in many forms. Names changed at distant rivers, details shifted, and the old ox acquired different celestial origins. Yet the 2 stars and the shining divide preserved the tale's heart. During the Han Dynasty, observers recorded and interpreted the bright figures of the night sky with increasing care. Vigar could be understood as the weaving maiden, Altair as the ox herd, and nearby stars as children or the pole balanced across his shoulders. The household had become a celestial arrangement that returned each year. Looking upward did not solve the family's sorrow. It did something quieter. It kept them visible to one another and to countless people below. A herder sleeping beside cattle, a woman winding thread near an open window, or a child crossing a courtyard at night could all recognize that distance had not ended relationship. Junyu and Nyolang held their separate banks through the turning seasons. Neither star moved close enough. Yet on certain summer evenings, magpies began gathering in unusual numbers among earthly branches. They faced the Milky Way, restless and attentive, as though studying the width of the river. Scene 17, the birds hear the sorrow. Magpies are alert to small disturbances. A spoon dropped in a courtyard, a bright bead beneath leaves, or a cat entering the wrong garden can bring several birds to investigate. Their black and white wings turn blue or green where sunlight touches them. Their voices are brisk, social, and difficult to ignore. The first magpie to notice Junyu's sorrow lived near the abandoned cottage. It had nested in the persimmon tree during the years when the children were small. Perhaps it remembered scraps of thread left on the windowsill. Perhaps the old ox had told it more than anyone knew. On a clear 7th-month night, the bird looked upward from the empty yard. Vigar shone east of the Milky Way. Altair answered from the other side. Between them lay a brightness no wing had tested. The magpie called to its mate. By dawn, 4 birds occupied the tree. The next evening there were 12, shifting along branches and trading rapid notes. More arrived from willow groves, tile roofs, and river banks. Villagers wondered why their familiar birds had assembled without grain or storm. Their agitation spread. Magpies farther south lifted from orchards. Northern birds left stands of pine. Across broad regions, small flocks turned toward the same hidden route in the sky. Feathers flashed above roads and paddies, the air filled with purposeful wingbeats. At the edge of heaven, the leading birds encountered cold. They climbed through cloud, each following the tail of another. Celestial guards tried to count them and quickly lost the number. No regulation had anticipated a migration driven by sympathy. The first flock reached Tyenha at dusk. Junyu came from her loom when she heard their calls. Nio Lang and the children emerged from their shelter. Birds settled upon both banks, drank no water, and began testing the current with fallen reeds. A single reed could not bear a magpie. A single bird could not span the river. Together, another possibility appeared. One magpie flew low over the surface until fatigue forced it down. Another placed itself beneath. A third joined beside them, then a fourth. Wings overlapped, backs aligned, and long tails interlaced. The living shape extended a little way from the shore. More birds descended. Those underneath held still while others rested above, distributing weight. The bridge did not resemble carved stone. It shifted, murmured, and adjusted constantly. Every section depended upon neighboring bodies. By midnight, a dark arch stretched over half the shining river. Starlight caught blue along thousands of wings. The birds' calls softened into a continuous rustle like silk being folded. Junyu understood their intention. She knelt and thanked the nearest magpie whose small claws gripped a celestial reed. Nio Lang bowed from the opposite bank. The children whispered encouragement whenever a gap closed. The High Court watched. Some officials objected that no crossing had been authorized. Others pointed out that the birds belonged neither fully to celestial administration nor to one earthly household. Their gift had arisen beyond the reach of any order. Shi Wangmu stood at a distant terrace with her hairpin in place. She could scatter the flock. She could widen Tyenha until every wing failed. Instead, she listened to the labor of innumerable creatures and saw her own law answered by cooperation. The arch was nearly complete. Only a narrow space remained at the center, bright water turning below. More wings appeared along the horizon, carrying the final span toward the waiting family. Scene 18, the bridge called Xiao. The last flock arrived before dawn. Its smallest bird carried one white feather in an otherwise black tail. It settled at the center of the unfinished arch, and the gap closed beneath its feet. From bank to bank, the magpie bridge was whole. In Chinese, it would be called Xiao, the bridge of magpies. It possessed no rails, pillars, or paving stones. Layered wings formed its surface. Each breath made a slight movement, so the path rose and fell with the life supporting it. Junyu stepped onto the first row of birds. Her slipper rested so lightly that the nearest magpie only tucked its head. She moved carefully, gathering her celestial robe to keep its hem from catching on beaks and tails. Nio Lang entered from the western shore. The children walked between him and the river edge, each holding part of the bamboo pole. No one ran. After so much waiting, haste would have made the crossing less real. Tyenha flowed beneath them. Close to the center, Junyu could see bright stones turning far below the water. Some were stars not yet placed in any earthly sky. Others looked like beads, seeds, and tiny lamps. The river's cold rose through the living bridge, but the magpies shared their warmth. The daughter saw her mother first without intervening mist. Junyu's face was thinner than she remembered. A new silver strand marked her dark hair. The child had grown taller since the summons. Loss had altered them in opposite directions. At the center, they reached one another. Junyu knelt and drew both children against her, the boy's stuffed fish pressed between them. Her daughter produced the red ribbon, faded now from celestial weather. Nio Lang placed his arms around all three, and for a while the bridge carried a still family above moving light. No speech could account for the time apart. They began with immediate truths. The children were safe. Junyu had seen every mirror signal. Niolang's star grass soup tasted terrible until a second boiling. The loom still creaked on cold mornings. Their voices overlapped, paused, and began again. The magpies adjusted beneath them. Several dipped their heads into the river. Others exchanged places with rested birds from the banks. The bridge taught its own lesson. Reunion was not supported by feeling alone. It required thousands of small acts repeated without applause. Shi Wangmu came to the eastern entrance. The family grew quiet, fearing the hairpin. Instead, the Queen Mother announced a new allowance. Once each year, on the 7th night of the 7th lunar month, the magpies might cross Tianhe. Junyu and Niolang could meet upon their bridge until dawn. It was far less than the life they wanted. One night could not replace shared seasons or return them to the cottage. Yet it was a door inside a wall that had seemed absolute. Junyu accepted without pretending the gift was complete. She asked that the children be allowed to pass freely between their parents during the reunion. Shi Wangmu agreed. Niolang asked that no birds suffer for helping them. The Queen Mother promised the flock safe passage through celestial gates. The remaining hours filled with touch and quiet conversation. Junyu braided her daughter's hair. Niolang showed her the wooden bell which he had brought from the shelter. The boy placed his 5-legged pebble cow in her palm. She admired its excellent balance. As dawn thinned the stars, the bridge began to loosen at its edges. The family walked together toward the center once more, unwilling to choose a bank too soon. At last, Junyu returned east. Niolang and the children moved west. Magpies lifted behind each step, leaving clear air over the river. The bird with the white tail rose last. One of its feathers had been rubbed bare at the crown. People would later say magpies lose feathers from their heads while building the annual bridge. Whether the mark came from celestial labor or ordinary summer mold, the story gave it a tender meaning. When full daylight arrived, Tianhe flowed unobstructed again. Vigar and Altair stood apart, yet both shores now contain the memory of a path, and every magpie below carried the possibility of its return. Scene 19. Rain on the 7th night. The next year did not pass quickly simply because a meeting had been promised. Junyu worked through autumn's thin clouds, winter's pale curtains, spring mist, and the heavy blue-gray cloth of summer rain. Each finished season brought the 7th month nearer. Niolang kept a calendar beside the shelter door. He cut one mark for every earthly moon, although celestial time made the spaces uneven. The children asked how many marks remained until the magpies came. He taught them to count backward without making each ordinary day feel disposable. Below, the valley watched for signs. Magpies gathered near water. Women aired silk under the sun. The Milky Way brightened in warm, clear darkness. Stories of the first bridge had already moved from household to household. On the 7th day of the 7th lunar month, clouds covered the region. Rain began before sunset, light enough to darken dust without forming puddles. Some worried that the birds could not build in wet weather. Older listeners said the drops were not an obstacle. They were the tears of reunion or farewell falling from heaven. Above the clouds, the magpies arrived on time. They formed Chhayao with practiced cooperation. The bridge curved lower than before, close enough to Tianhe for tail feathers to touch the gleaming surface. Junyu wore a simple sash woven from earthly silk she had saved. Niolang carried a basket of dried persimmons from the valley house, preserved by neighbors who still remembered them. Their children crossed first. The daughter brought a piece of writing from lessons with a kindly celestial tutor. The son carried a new pebble animal with only 4 legs this time. Junyu praised both offerings equally. They shared food at the center of the bridge. Celestial peaches stood beside rough millet cakes. Dried fruit had wrinkled skins and deep sweetness. Junyu held one beneath her nose before tasting, breathing in the yard, the eaves, and the hands that had hung it to dry. Nyo Lang told her the old cottage still stood. Neighbors had repaired one broken shutter. A magpie nested above the loom. Indigo grew wild against the wall, blooming blue where no one had planted it that year. Junyu described the cloud patterns she had woven for the valley. A narrow rain just after sowing had been hers. So was the warm sunset on the boy's birthday. Celestial duty, once only a chain, had become one way to care from afar. They did not spend the whole night grieving. The children invented a game of finding shapes among the star pebbles. Nyo Lang claimed one cluster resembled the old ox asleep. Junyu found a shuttle, a rabbit, and a dumpling that had opened in the pot. Their laughter moved along the birds' backs and softened the dark. Near dawn, the expected sorrow returned. Their daughter asked why one night remained the limit. Junyu said rules can change slowly, especially when they are old and believe themselves permanent. Chhuayao itself had not existed until small creatures revealed what law had failed to imagine. Rain continued on earth. It touched tile, lotus leaf, cattle track, and mulberry branch. Young women beneath the eaves listened to its delicate persistence. They thought of skillful hands, patient hearts, and a family meeting above the cloud. When the bridge parted, each member walked backward for several steps, keeping the others in view. Magpies rose between them like black petals scattered by wind. Vigar and Altair regained their distant stations. The rainfall ended shortly after sunrise. Threads of water hung from spiderwebs in the fields. Every crossing shone. For those who knew the legend, even the smallest web suggested a bridge made carefully enough to hold what seemed impossible. Scene 20. Needles beneath lamplight. The 7th night became Qixi, the evening of the double 7th. Its customs grew across centuries and regions, entering courtyards, market streets, gardens, and family rooms. The tale above remained a love story, but the earthly festival also honored Junyu's patient craft. During the Han dynasty and in traditions shaped over long generations, the weaving maiden's star was associated with dexterity and the hopes of young women. Hands capable of guiding fine thread helped clothe a household, repair what wore thin, and create beauty within necessary work. Skill was practical, social, and worthy of a wish. As Qixi approached, women prepared needles, colored thread, fruit, flowers, and small offerings. A table might be set beneath open sky with melons, nuts, tea, or delicate cakes. Incense rose in one slender column. Vigar gleamed above, and Altair shone across the Milky Way. One custom invited participants to thread needles by moonlight. The eye of a needle is tiny even at noon. Under a faint lamp or silver moon, success required steady breath and sensitive fingers. Thread was moistened, twisted to a point, and guided toward the narrow opening. There was no need for competition in the quietest courtyards. An elder sister might hold the lamp. A grandmother might laugh about how easy the task had seemed when her eyes were young. Someone failing again and again could hand the needle to a friend. The wish for dexterity already contained cooperation. Elsewhere, a needle floated upon water in a bowl. When sunlight returned, its shadow cast curious shapes on the bottom. Fine patterns suggested skill or good fortune. Children leaned close without touching the table, watching a dark line tremble on clear water. Spiderwebs also carried meaning. A small box might be left outdoors so a spider could spin inside overnight. In the morning, a dense, orderly web promised clever hands. The creature that once turned scraps near Junyu's cottage into shining nets had become a tiny examiner of craft. Girls and women whispered wishes to the weaver girl. Some asked for ability at sewing, weaving, music, or household arts. Some hoped for a kind partner and a union marked by mutual regard. Others wanted health for parents, harmony among siblings, or the confidence to make a life shaped by their own choosing. The story gave those wishes a bright address in the sky. Junyu knew both celestial mastery and the roughness of earthly fiber. She had repaired an old loom, taught neighbors to ease tension, and learned that flawless work was not the same as a complete life. Asking her for skill meant asking for patience, judgment, and care. Niolang's presence mattered too. He was no splendid prince descending with treasures. He carried water, mended baskets, cooked porridge, and shared the unglamorous labor of a household. After the wrong choice by the lake, he returned the robe and spent his life respecting the choice Junyu made. Their gentlest union was built from daily regard rather than possession. In some towns, Chishi became lively, with decorated stalls and crowded bridges. In smaller homes, it remained nearly silent. One could place fruit on a plate, look for Vigar and Altair, and make a wish without anyone else hearing. Above, Junyu saw the courtyard lamps as warm points scattered across darkness. Each needle flashed briefly when turned toward the moon. Human threads were coarser than celestial silk, yet their makers joined households across years. A mother teaching a daughter, a friend helping a friend, a worn garment carrying the evidence of repair. If clouds hid the stars, the festival continued. The lovers did not cease to exist because the eye could not find them. Rain might mean they were meeting privately beyond sight. A covered sky could even feel merciful, like a curtain drawn around a family given too little time together. Late in the evening, unfinished thread was wound and offerings brought indoors. Lamps went out one by one. Needles rested in their cases. The wishes remained fine as silk and surprisingly strong. Scene 21, the story travels with the stars. A story kept for many centuries learns to live in more than one house. The weaver girl and cowherd traveled along rivers, roads, and family lines. Each teller carried the stars intact while changing the path beneath them. In one village, Niolang was poor but cheerful. In another, he had suffered harsh treatment from relatives before receiving the ox. Some tellings made Shiwangmu Junyu's stern mother, others placed a heavenly emperor behind the separation. The celestial robe might be hidden deliberately, blown aside by wind, or guarded by sisters who departed too soon. These differences did not make the tale empty. They revealed the questions each household brought to it. Who controls a young woman's future? Can a boundary protect order while injuring those beneath it? What does a person owe family, work, love, and the place from which they came? The gentlest answer remains visible in Junyu's decision after the robe was returned. She knew the road upward and kept the garment that could seek it. She stayed because the earthly morning offered a life she wanted to test. Choice transformed an awkward encounter into the beginning of trust. Across East Asia, related star festivals developed their own names and customs. The same bright Vigar and Altair could stand above bamboo wishes, summer markets, woven ornaments, or quiet prayers. Rivers and languages changed below them. The broad heavenly divide remained recognizable. Sailors used stars for direction, farmers watched seasonal skies, weavers understood the crossing of separate threads, children found the 3 bright points of the summer triangle and then searched for the pale band between the lovers. Astronomy and affection occupied the same darkness without crowding each other. Vigar is among the most brilliant stars visible from much of the northern world. Altair shines with 2 fainter companions nearby, easily read as the children or the ends of a carrying pole. The physical stars are separated by distances beyond an old storyteller's measure, yet the eye receives them together on one summer night. That human act of joining lights into relationship is not foolish. Constellations have always helped people place memory upon the immense. A star becomes easier to greet when it belongs to a weaver who misses her family. A white galactic band becomes more intimate when imagined as water that birds once crossed. The old ox also survives wherever the legend travels. Its patience lies beneath the spectacular events. The animal bears lonely years beside Nio Lang, speaks when counsel has ripened, and gives what remains of its strength to protect the family. Without that quiet companion, no ascent reaches heaven. The magpies preserve another kind of wisdom. No individual bird performs a miracle. Their bridge exists because each offers a back, a wing, a place in the formation. Some carry weight, others replace the tired. The smallest closes the final gap. Even Shi Wangmu changes under repeated telling. She may remain severe, but her absolute boundary yields one night. The shift is limited, perhaps painfully so. Still, a sovereign who listens to birds has moved from the position she held when the hairpin first cut the sky. On every 7th night, earthly watchers bring their own lives to the legend. Someone separated by work recognizes Nio Lang. A craftsperson understands Junyu's disciplined hands. A parent sees the basket swaying through cloud. A child may care most about the pebble cow with 5 legs. No single meaning must replace the others. Love, regret, skill, duty, migration, family, and seasonal return can rest beside one another. Like colored strands in a wide cloth, they become stronger through crossing. When late summer moves toward autumn, the stars shift west earlier each night. Chishi passes, magpies disperse, and looms resume their ordinary clatter, yet the river overhead retains a faint memory of wings. Scene 22, one thread across the dark. The valley cottage eventually softened into the land around it. Tiles slipped from the roof. Indigo spread past the wall, and the persimmon tree hollowed while continuing to leaf each spring. Travelers sometimes rested beside the old ox's grassy mound without knowing whose companion lay there. Inside the house, the pear-wood treadle remained attached to the loom. Wind entering through a broken shutter moved loose cords. On certain nights they tapped the frame in a slow, irregular rhythm, almost but not quite like weaving. Above that quiet place, Vigar and Altair returned every year. The stars required no roof, yet the family remembered one. Junyu remembered rain in bowls beneath leaks. Nio Lang remembered blue dye in the lines of her hands. Their daughter remembered the silk bird turning over her cradle, and their son kept the stuffed fish even after its fabric had grown thin. Chi-Shi arrived again beneath a clear sky. Magpies gathered in the persimmon branches, then rose in small groups after sunset. Their wingbeats disturbed the leaves and sent one ripe fruit to the ground. Through the celestial gates they traveled, black and white against deep blue. They reached Tianhe, rested briefly along its reeds, and began the familiar work. No command organized them. Practice and attention were enough. Chayao extended from both banks. Near its center, the white-tailed bird's descendants held the narrowest span. Starlight polished their feathers. Below, the river carried innumerable points of brightness without losing a single one. Junyu approached wearing the pale robe once folded in the cedar chest. She had mended its cuff with ordinary blue silk. The repair was visible if one stood close, and she had refused every offer to conceal it. Nyo Lang came with the wooden bell in his hand. The children, older now, walked beside him. Their baskets had long ago been set down, but the bamboo pole remained near Altair as a faint line of stars. At the middle of the bridge, they greeted one another without urgency. Reunion had become a precious ritual, not an escape from time. Junyu touched each familiar face. Nyo Lang fastened the faded red ribbon around her wrist. They looked down toward earth. Courtyard tables held fruit and tea. Needles glimmered beneath lamps. A child pointed upward while an elder traced the heavenly river with one finger. In another home, someone too tired for ceremony opened a window and offered a silent wish. Junyu heard those wishes as faint movements in her thread. People asked for skillful hands, but also for gentleness with what hands could hold. They asked for meetings after distance, patience during long seasons, and love that did not require one person to lose the road home. She carried these hopes back to her loom after every reunion. Some became rain fine enough for seedlings. Some became sunsets with a warm seam along the horizon. One became a pale strand beside the moon, descending so far that a farmer might think it had touched a mulberry tree. The heavenly river continued to flow. Its presence was not denied. Separation, once drawn, left a real current between the stars, yet the story did not end at the river bank. Wings answered water, signals answered mist. Annual return answered the claim that distance must become forgetting. Down in the old valley, night air moved through silver grass above the ox's grave. Frogs clicked near the lake where 7 robes had rested long ago. The irrigation gate released a narrow stream, and water ran along furrows whose shapes had outlasted the hands that made them. Farther away, a loom went quiet in a village house. Its weaver cut the finished cloth from the beam, rolled it carefully, and covered the frame until morning. She stepped into the courtyard to cool her hands. Vigar shone on one side of the Milky Way. Altair waited on the other. For a moment, she thought she saw a dark curve joining them. It might have been a thin cloud. It might have been the bridge. She did not need to decide. The night had room for the weaver, the cowherd, the children, the old ox, the queen mother, and every small bird lending strength to another. It had room for rules and for the mercy that teaches rules to bend. It had room for work set down, then taken up again with a changed heart. Now the celestial loom slows. The shuttle crosses once softly, drawing a final thread through the dark. The wooden bell answers from the far bank. Beneath those distant lights, fields settle under dew, household fires sink to embers, and resting hands uncurl. Nothing more is required of the stars before morning. Vigar keeps her quiet station. Altair keeps his. Between them, unseen wings remember the shape of a bridge.